Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia, chapter 316, my official review for the official translations. Hey everybody, so very quick word, I'm going to be doing this ad lib. I don't have any notes. Unfortunately today I couldn't prepare notes. I don't have 4 hours to spend on Hero Academia today. It's got a lot of other work going on in the background. So because of that, I'm going to try and do this as best I can without the notes. I'll try to catch everything I want to catch, but there's a possibility I might repeat myself. So in advance, just keep that in mind. But I'll do my best here to get this done and get the good stuff. Overall, with this chapter, there were a few different things compared to the spoilers, which I'm very happy about because they clear some things up. And overall, with the chapter, I've also seen some of the reaction online. One of the big things is people saying that Izuku is being reckless. And honestly, that's a pretty bold thing to say right now. Like, believe me, I would love to rag on Izuku being reckless. Heck, in this chapter, I'm definitely going to point out the fact that All For One once criticized Izuku for being someone who, let me see, what was it that he had said? Yeah, someone who, like his master, gives himself over to blind rage, in reference to Izuku. I would love to criticize Izuku here, but there's too many things going on in the chapter to really make that criticism stick. It's really early to say that he was being reckless in this situation. Mind you, it's clear he has tunnel vision, but there's other circumstances here that make that question a little bit more interesting. But let me think. Where do we start for realsies on this chapter? The chapter covers the immediate fallout to Nagant, and then it like hyper just jumps to All For One's situation there, which is just like, that's also kind of novel. I guess in terms of general notes, what's interesting is really the last 2 pages of what All For One is saying, because this is actually, we could talk about writing stuff on these last 2 pages. Let's say last 3 pages. If you notice the last 3 pages, when All For One is giving his monologue, it's, he's talking about many different things. He switches the topic quite a lot. And that, when you do that, writing wise, and we're going to step away from Hero Academia here real quick, it usually suggests that there is a conflict between what the plot requires a character to say and what the character would naturally say. When you have this conflict occur in a meta sense, you end up in a situation where readers could eventually make the claim that the dialogue is disjointed. And really, in real life, this is a complaint that is lobbied a lot against certain works. Usually when dialogue doesn't exactly flow well together, people can pick up on that. And in this case, when you look at what All For One is saying, you can see that the thing is there. And when we're going back into Hero Academia, the question is, you have to ask, like, what exactly is All For One wanting to say in this situation? And what is Horikoshi wanting to say? If you were to engage with this critically, what you would be thinking next would be, was the author writing things that he felt had to be like ticked off the box? Or were these all things that make sense for All For One to say in context? One thing I will say is that when you look at the composition of the page, the jarringness of the way that the dialogue does not connect to each other honestly looks very purposeful. If I was to look at this, you could say in context, All For One is such a guy who tries to be evil. He does things for the sake of the reaction. He does things for the sake of evil because that's his character to some degree. Him actually going in there and wanting to go through everything he wants to say actually makes sense in context for the character. I have no idea whether or not this is a sign that Horikoshi was rushing through dialogue and therefore, made the transition between the dialogue abrupt. But, on paper, I think you could probably justify the nature of the dialogue and the way it doesn't really connect. Again, it also, given how the stuff is set up, it does look like the jarringness is intentional. If you were to ask me, does the author realize, that's a better way of saying it, does the author realize that All For One was jumping all over the place in this dialogue? I'd probably say yeah. And honestly, paints the picture of All For One just being a guy that does things for the sake of the evils. But of course, now with that done, I do want to take you in step by step on that particular dialogue at the end because it's just so interesting. And we'll also dissect it because it's just, he goes all over the place that it's worth looking at how all over the place he goes. And for that, we will start at page 15 because page 15 is where it's interesting. So All For One starts off by saying, I didn't force her, you know, she acted of her own free will. So that's just All For One stroking his ego. We know all the pressures that were going on in there. He can say whatever he wants. We all know he was twisting her arm a little bit. He knew how he read her. Like, look, honestly, not All For One's fault that Nagant is really basic. Not his fault that she's easily manipulatable. Not his fault that it's not that hard to make her go shoot a kid. You know, honestly, I would be upset if All For One didn't take advantage of her. But yeah, that's just regular All For One doublespeak. All For One then goes into saying, but those poor souls who stumble on the road of life are labeled villains. Okay, there's a lot of people who have stumbled on the road of life and they're not villains. This is just a generalization. And really the counterpoint to All For One is always going to be Vigilantes, because Vigilantes has a lot of people who have stumbled across the road, but they are not villains, or they have never been labeled villains. Vigilantes as a series will always be a counterpoint to any absolutism that the characters won't talk about, because Vigilantes traditionally has broken a lot of things when it comes to the Hero Academia propaganda itself. Anyway, the next little bit is a line of thought, but it's interesting. All For One goes in saying, people go on and on about quirks, preaching the merits of individualism, but ours is a regimented society under tight control. One where the wrong sort of individuality gets you ostracized, purged. So one thing that's really important to keep in mind here, especially if you're looking at the Viz translation, you're going to be in a little bit of a problem here, because it is very likely that All For One is double speaking right now. And the problem here is specifically the word individuality, because quirks is not the correct translation for the word that represents the powers that people have. And I remember that this is information that came out from one of the first translation groups that did Hero Academia. I think it was Fallen Angels Translation. They were the ones that came in with quirks as the name of the power. I don't know if anyone has been here when My Hero Academia was being covered by Manga Stream like years and years ago. But initially, Manga Stream translated quirks as individuality. So keep that in mind, because when you keep that in mind, the doublespeak becomes much more clear. People go on and on about quirks preaching the merits of individualism. So this is where the two are separate. But here's where it's interesting. One where the wrong sort of individuality gets you ostracized. So in that one line, keeping in mind the issues with the translation of quirks, you understand that he is referring both to the mindset and the power itself. And in terms of like the wrong sort of quirk gets you ostracized, we've seen it many times on a very social level. But in terms of the wrong sort of individuality, we know what he's pretty much talking about. What he comes in here with saying is really interesting, because he's making a point about society, and he's contrasting it against the idea that people preach about individualism. Now, the reason individualism is being brought in here is because of the individuality conclusion that occurs here. It's honestly really interesting. Preaching the merits of individualism in a Japanese society. Really? The merits of individualism in a Japanese society. People go on and on about quirks. Preaching individual. Can you give me examples of individualism? This all just strikes me as odd, because we just got out of a little bit of an arc where a big crux of it is a man being blamed for the sins of his son. I just find it interesting because even Jujutsu Kai recently, I know this is a different thing, but Jujutsu Kai recently had a little bit of a quip about how being held back by your family is a feature or a virtue in Japanese society. So honestly, I find that spot kind of odd. You preach the merits of individualism in a society where someone like Stain is preaching for heroes to do better for society's sake. I have seen, when it comes to Stain's a big counterpoint. Really, he is legitimately a big counterpoint. and from my perspective, like a good chunk of the sensational heroes that we follow, they're people that sacrifice themselves for other people. Like you have Izuku quite literally right now burning himself up, like he's burning himself alive, to try and save people. And we're talking about preaching the merits of individualism in a society where a good chunk of the kids are being taught to protect other people. I mean, it's really funny too because we just came out of like the class 1A versus 1B fight, where Aizawa reminds us, hey, we're all here. We're trying to protect people. That's what we're gonna do. We gotta be able to protect ourselves so that we can protect people. Yeah, no. This line I've seen no. I haven't really seen people preaching the merits of individualism more than the merits of collectivism. I think like we're actually at a, if anything, collectivism is probably still having a bigger effect. It's just interesting. It's a Japanese manga. Japan is it's very collectivist in nature. We are seeing someone get hit because of collectivism, and you're talking about the merits of individualism as if heroes are told to be selfish, as if heroes are told to get ahead. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, I know you can come up with the examples of the people who preach individualism in Hero Academia, I think, but you have as many counter examples for collectivism. So this is just why it's so weird. And he's like, everything about it is weird. People go on and on about quirks. All For One goes on and on about quirks. I have never, like, All For One is the only one that has 5 different metaphors for how he feels about quirks. Really think about that. Also, mind you, like, that is intentional because All For One, the way he's speaking here is incredibly, either he's leaning in on how bad he is, or he's extremely unaware of how bad he is. So keep that in mind. There's many layers of things going on here. But we'll keep moving. Ours is a regimented society under tight control, one where the wrong sort of individuality gets you ostracized and purged. It's really funny because All For One is the type of person that locked up his brother in a room. You want to talk about regiment and under tight control, where people get ostracized and purged if you have the wrong sort of individuality? Bro, we can just turn it back around to All For One, man. So this first line, what is he trying to say in this first line? The first bubble is establishing an arena, that being that people go on and on about quirks and they preach about the merits of individualism. Likely the reason those two were tied is because quirks are individualities. That's probably why the individualism line is there. And then he goes on to make a conclusion about society, or like he makes the contrast. He makes the contrast that society is under tight control. So what is he trying to say in that spot? If the English is correct, he's making one of those villain pleas. He's saying like, yeah, you tell us that we're free to be who we are, but when we are who we are, we get penalized. You understand the plight he's making, but it applies to his society as well. He probably knows that though. Like, he's probably aware of that. He's just making the argument. Now, one thing that he does conveniently leave out in this bit of rhetoric, to what degrees can individualism be preserved? For instance, is individualism that infringes on someone else's individualism, is that worthwhile? Okay, so that's the first little bit. All For One then goes into saying the democracy, socialism doesn't matter. There are no exceptions because the root of all this predates the concept of human society altogether. It's the principle that governs all social organisms. So this one, what is he trying to say in this bit? This bit is still connected to the top. He's saying, I think, that no matter what society you have, you're going to have a situation where society is going to be under tight control and people are going to get ostracized. He then goes on to say that this predates the concept of human society altogether. It's the principle that governs all social organisms. So what is he trying to say here? Because he doesn't tell us what the principle is. So for this one, I went and I took a look at the fan translation to just try and understand. And just to give you the quick rundown, the fan translation, it was like, in the end, this is a control society. If you can't fit in, you'll be excluded. There are no exceptions. Doesn't matter if it's a democracy or a dictatorship. The origins are all the same. This was an issue before the first traces of society even emerged. It's just human nature. So really, when you come back to it, the principle that he's probably talking about is flatly in groups and out groups. At first, I would have like made maybe a broader point about maybe it being like desire to control or just general hypocrisy, but it does seem to be in groups and out groups. The fan translations make it a lot clearer, and just flatly that the big point is if you can't fit in, you'll be excluded. Anyway, yeah, here All For One is just making a statement about loners and the rest of the group. Really, All For One is probably the guy that was a loner for a good portion of his life and bullied, and he was on the outs the majority of his life, and then people suddenly started liking him when they realized, oh god, he can kill us. Yeah, no, All For One. Oh man, I can't wait to see his backstory. He's probably going to be really pathetic. I can't wait. Don't bully people. You never know when they're going to turn into giant potato heads. Now here is where we have a break. He goes on to tell Izuku that the path he's chosen is a thorny one. Every battle grinds away at your soul with no end in sight. So those two lines are linked, and then he switches to telling Izuku that he is very madly in love with him. Or, you know, the equivalent. He tells him he's been thinking about him while he's in jail. So that's the third conversation, where he just shifts the focus away from Izuku's plight to him being like, yeah, bro, I love you. And I do love how he calls All Might a useless oaf. So here we do have three distinct conversations occurring. And in a way, he largely goes about telling us nothing except for the fact that he's been thinking of Izuku. So, like, really, props to All For One for being able to distract Izuku long enough for that bomb to go off. Now, with regards to the bomb, I mean, are we going to take bombs seriously? We saw just now what happened to Nagant. There's no real reason to take the bomb seriously. Because when you have All For One saying that All Might no longer interests me, and that he's going towards Izuku, and referencing that whole thing about it's your turn, what I read is pretty much All For One is saying to Izuku, hey, you know how I really messed with All Might? You know, took the grandchild of his master and turned him into a weapon? Yeah, well, now I'm going to really mess with you. And so when he does the explosion, I don't think he's trying to kill Izuku. I think he thinks that Izuku's going to be just fine. He's just telling Izuku he's going to get serious. And this is really exciting. When we were on the stream, I was making jokes saying that he better blow up Izuku if he's going to do something great. He better blow up Izuku. But then when he did it, I was very disappointed because it happened at the end of the chapter. And if it happens at the end of the chapter, it's very likely it's going to be overwritten in the next chapter's beginning. And I really do think that's going to occur here. There were a lot of big people in that room with Izuku. In the spoilers, I had a thought about what could happen, but after seeing the chapter, I have a different thought. But yeah, no, I'm actually really excited because if he's saying he's going to haze Izuku as hard as he hazed All Might, I'm expecting to see people attack the UA. I'm expecting to see Izuku's mom captured. Because if I was him, I would really twist the knife. And if he's willing to go explode Izuku up, that's not that big a... I would respect that. Wholeheartedly, I would respect that. But yeah, that's my bit for the beginning here. Let's quickly address whether or not Izuku was reckless. No. And now let's go into the page-by-page walkthrough, and I will elaborate on the whole thing as we go. It's just a page-by-page walkthrough has important information that we should probably talk about before we get there. The first page is Endeavor arriving to help out Izuku and the rest. This was actually a pretty good establishment page. I remember this because someone had made a quip about Endeavor in the translations. But Endeavor arrives and he apologizes that he was late because Rain and him doesn't get along so well. So I'll just very quickly show you this little page from 248 where he told Bakugo that excuses don't matter when you show up late because there's more than grades at stake for these type of situations. So it's just kind of interesting, right? If you apply nuance, you understand, right? It's important that Endeavor gives Bakugo the lesson because it's important to try and do your best with what you got. But there are such a thing as limits. And in this case, I don't even know if Horikoshi noticed what he did here because the harsh reality is that people are limited by a lot of external factors in Hero Academia. So it looks a little bit bad on Endeavor to have to come in with the apology when he once upon a time berated Bakugo for excuses don't matter when you're late. But this is just the reality of the situation. And again, it makes sense in a teaching context. Like teachers usually are a lot harsher with these type of situations in order to get the lesson across. You know, like how it is in school, like sometimes teachers teach you the ideals, but then as you grow older, you realize that the ideals are actually really hard to meet most times. Honestly, from my perspective, Horikoshi just needed to give an excuse as to why Endeavor and Hawks showed up late. Next page is Hawks falling, which essentially tells us how much capability Hawks has right now. And the next bit here, because you have Hawks saying this kid, the next bit here is most likely Hawks being impressed that Izuku was able to do so much and is reporting so much information despite his situation. So Hawks is just impressed with Izuku's, most likely his information analysis type ability. Now page 3, I'm very happy to see page 3 properly translated, because in the spoilers, it made it seem like Nagant was corrupted by All for One beforehand, but this is a lot better in the long run. Now Hawks introduces himself, so that implies that he never met Nagant. But one thing I do find it funny is that he says, All for One must have sweet talked you into this. I know you're better than this. It's funny because, like, if you're someone who could be sweet talked, I don't know if you are better than that, you know? Like, it's a funny little bit of line, but you understand the meaning behind it. He's saying, like, yeah, look, we know that you were talked into it, but come on, we believe in you. We know there's more to you. It's definitely, Hawks is very right. He's optimistic to a fault. He's trending towards positive, but I like that because that's consistent with the character. Hawks then goes on to say, now that you've fought that kid, I bet you realize that it's too early for us to throw in the towel. He's just saying, like, again, he's leaning towards the optimism. He's saying, like, look, see, there is still some positive in the system. Now, page 5 is just, page 4 is an emotional plea to Nagant. The one interesting line is Hawks saying, leave us with some hope to hold on to. Just because that's one of the lines that could say, oh, well, Nagant's going to die. But I think this one is just serving to animate her, right? Then we go into page 5, which is Nagant's narration, where she's making the note about how Hawk's eyes essentially haven't given up. Now, the one thing here is that Nagant says, I bet that, like me, you've done horrible things all while following orders. Now, this is the questionable part, because so far, the only horrible thing we've seen Hawks legitimately do is killing Twice. But we've seen what happens if Twice gets to make, for instance, Shigaraki. Twice was the equivalent of someone about to destroy a population center. About to destroy a population center in, let's say, a couple of hours if he gets away. And not only that, when we saw Hawks doing that with Twice, we saw Hawks have a lot of resistance to it. So I'm not sure about this rhetoric that Nagant has here. I do hope that the author clarifies whether or not the Safety Commission changed slightly, because if things changed after the lady took over, this line doesn't really go through, because we've seen how bad the situation is with the villains. We know that the villains actually probably require some degree of pragmatism. Nagant also has a line about saying that the road only leads to chaos. The way forward is shrouded in darkness. So how are people still so bright? Oh, she died. Yeah, this is just Nagant. She's in like in a dark spiral. Nagant's opinions really don't matter anymore because Nagant's been proven to be wrong time and time again here. Nagant's just a person spiraling. And when I say her opinions don't matter, I mean her opinions about the current state of society. She is right to be really bothered with the Safety Commission, to put that lightly. But it's just the way, again, the issues are her conclusions. Her conclusions are made from a point of pessimism, and that is ultimately biasing her. But we do end up with a nice page of Nagant, again hammering home that she was an innocent person at the beginning of all this. Now at this page you can notice she is in a nice home, she has a nice pair of pajamas on, she has her bandages right next to her. So this is a callback just to the idea that it's her arm that's going to make the world better. So she took off the bandages, she's looking up. This is really a powerful image, so good on the author for doing the imagery on that one. Like, you can really tell the story on that. And then page 6 is just her blurting out what exactly happened. At the end of the day, are explosions dangerous in Hero Academia? I don't think so. She exploded so hard, cracks formed on her face, but she's still here, fully alive. Let's remind ourselves what that explosion looked like. I'm not surprised. I think she's going to be alive. I think Central Hospital saved her, in all honesty. I think she's going to be fine. Maybe a little bit damaged. Now on this page we have the author doing the very wonderful thing and just, realigning history and telling us that All for One reached out to some others. So that's just saying, like, hey guys, listen, it's not just me. There's a few more people you gotta watch out for. So this is just setting up more enemies for the future. Whatever. Now in this case, I think the author has a safe pass. It's pretty much just Nagant saying that most likely after she got the deal, he talked to a few more people in her earshot. And Nagant is probably still one of the only people that could match Izuku, but these people that are showing up behind All for One are pretty much just the mooks that other heroes have to deal with. So that's likely what we're seeing here. We always need to have extra villains, so it's not surprising that they're bringing up more now. A good chunk of them are probably going to be pretty basic though, like as basic as the Liberation Front probably was. Anyway, Nagant then goes into trying to understand how Hawks could be stronger than her. And then Hawks flashes back to his belief in Endeavor and what the symbol of Endeavor meant. Pretty much just Hawks tells Nagant it's a matter of perspective. That's all it really comes down to. And again, I do want you to keep in mind, Nagant came from a very comfortable place. Hawks didn't. And that, I don't know what the author wants to say about it, but that likely has a role in how their viewpoints were structured. Anyway, at the end of page 8, we have Endeavor coming in, bringing in Shizaki, and this is where Shizaki gets his big moment. Now, in terms of the conversation that happens here, it's about the same level as the conversation that happens with Muscular, which is both good and bad. Good in that it's a fair showing. They both got treated equally, but bad in that Shizaki has more character than Muscular. But we still have a few interesting points here. We have Shizaki's plight coming out. We have Shizaki showing us that he has legitimately not learned anything, still calling Izuku diseased, which is just reference to him thinking that heroism is a disease. And then we have Izuku, I think this is probably like the sketchiest thing that he did, bringing up Eri. And that triggers Shizaki to thinking like, yeah, if we have Eri, we can probably fix everything. But then Izuku comes back with his redemption type shtick, saying that he wants him to apologize to Eri. I am actually really excited to see how self-aware this guy might be. Now, we also have All Might arriving, finally. Oh, did I mention that Endeavor said that they got the call, which confirmed that All Might had sent the message out? Anyway, we have All Might arriving. What happened to the briefcase? What was the briefcase? I don't know. It honestly makes me wonder if we are just kind of rushing through things. But I don't see any reason why we would be rushing through things, so I'm not going to say we are. Now, anyway, page 11 is where things get really interesting. We have the note that Nagant is being taken away for medical aid, which is good to know. Again, I think she's going to live, especially if Central Hospital is involved. What you have here is really interesting in this sequence of panel. You have Hawks being the one talking, but then you have the little flashback of Nagant's face, and you have Izuku's face, which is just showing that he's getting really hardcore tunnel vision. Now, this was really cool, because he goes one for all, and you see the darkness descending. This was artistically very cool, although, remember, All For One has berated Izuku for losing himself to anger before. Just keep that in mind. And then we go into page 12, and page 12 starts with a black period. So this is really interesting. What occurs here is that the time skip happens, and the time skip is more than a night. There's no way around that. It has to be more than a night. You want to know why? Because Edgeshot was away from Hawks and Endeavor working on finding the Liberation Front. There's no way that these people come together within hours. There's just no way around it. And when you look at the black panels, I said this in a spoiler video, I believe, but what's going on here is that this black period is pretty much just kind of, well, it might be reflective of how Izuku wasn't really registering things that happened between one point and now. That's likely what it is. So in this black period, get ready, because we're probably going to find out a lot of different flashbacks that happened. Probably the Shizaki talk happens in there. Probably Nagant recovering happens in there. A lot of things probably happen in this black period. Anyway, as we go into page 12, what should be kept in mind here is good luck in there, everyone, from Hawks. And then Endeavor saying, hang on, Deku, don't be reckless. So that reckless line is probably the thing that really caught people off guard. But honestly, look at Hawks. He's holding a walkie-talkie. And if you look at the panel below that, this is where I made my mistake. Hawks isn't in that panel. And as far as we can see, he wasn't there when we see the other shots inside of the mansion. And this is where the conversation really begins. Now, when it comes to the recklessness, and Endeavor is the one that frames it, so we should assume that there is some recklessness going in on Izuku, but we know Izuku has tunnel vision. We know he's not thinking properly at this point anymore. But when you have Hawks far away on walkie-talkie and you have heroes coming in like this does not speak recklessness. Like, if they really wanted to stop Izuku, they would. They could. If it really came down to it, these people could probably get in Izuku's way if they had to slow him down slightly. So this is why you have to be really careful with making an opinion about Izuku right now, because the way that the author brings this in, first he has Endeavor framing things, but you also don't have the full gist of the situation. As long as Hawk stands there with a walkie-talkie, there is more to the situation that you don't fully understand. And when you have the fact that Team Lurkers showed up, even though they were on another assignment, time had to have passed here. There's no way around that. Likely, these guys came in with some idea of a plan. And when you see everyone else going in there with Izuku, that was probably within their general plan. I heavily doubt that those people were following Izuku because they were like, oh my god, Izuku, no, we have to stop you. Oh my god, oh, well, I guess we have no other choice but to follow you. Heavily doubt that. When you have Hawk standing in the background, that smells like a big plan. What ended up happening here, I guess, is that Izuku was just their first line of defense. But mind you, we also have other big people coming in here. Now, speaking of framing devices, we also have this recalling. All for One and Shigaraki aren't able to steal one for all from me. So what this is just to say is that Izuku went in there thinking that there was a limit to the amount of things that could happen to him. Now, if Izuku's going in there to fight All for One, and he thinks All for One's going to be there, he should be expecting to be beaten up. He should be expecting to see someone try to beat him up, especially when Nagant says, hey, he's got more people. So this entire plan here, most likely, got the okay from them, and next week we're going to see maybe some of them talking if we get to follow up on this. Maybe we're going to see a little bit of the plan being established or just a general approach. They probably don't have a big plan because All for One is just too unpredictable. But next week I am legitimately expecting to see a lot of revision happening. I'm expecting to see everyone fine. I'm still expecting to see Kamui Woods being able to protect everyone. Like honestly, I'm expecting to see the majority of them get out of it more or less okay. And I will make the note, if that's not what happens and we actually see like really hardcore damage depiction, ignoring the possibility that we go to some other group, if we actually see hardcore damage for people, I will really appreciate that. But it's just like right now, the odds I don't think are great. Anyway, on page 14, we have them going in and All for One having his big moment. Now, note, All for One is back to his wonderful little suit and he's back to his life support. So he's having a good time. Now, from this, it says, because if you're seeing this message, that must have been what happened. So that just seems to me that this is a pre-recorded message. And then Endeavor says the other damning thing on page 15. Specifically, the place is deserted. I should have known. So this is one of those lines that, again, acts as framing. I really wonder if this is going to make sense in context next week if we get them having a plan. If a plan comes in, then I'm going to be curious about that line. But right now, it's a framing device. It's just, when someone says I should have known, it's just pretty much saying that they made a error in judgment. Now, if you ask me, like, do I think it's possible that these people wouldn't think that the mansion has been trapped after he exploded Lady Nagant? Like, really, if you have a person who's willing to explode Lady Nagant, are you going to be ready for anything? I think that would be possible, but plots require that assumptions have to be made, and sometimes those assumptions have to be, like, super bad in order to make the plot move on. And this happened again so rushed. This is so rushed that when this occurs, you have to be ready for some tomfoolery. Anyway, page 15 is just seeing the descent of Izuku, right? You have that little thing where you see the tick. Well, actually, you hear the ticks multiple times. But you have Izuku there. You can see also, actually, this is interesting. You can see that he's bandaged up. So this is actually another good show of the fact that time passed. Izuku had to get bandaged up, right? So at least a day has probably passed. Anyway, this is just showing the descent of Izuku. And then we go into page 14 and 15, which we already talked about at length. Really, when you look at those final pages, they're all set up to show you a situation without all the information. And when an author withholds from you all the information, like, really think about that. Every time that the author has withheld from you information, what have we gotten out from it? Well, I can tell you. When he withheld information going into the war, turned out Mirio was active again. We saw him show up in the war in a relatively anticlimactic sense. When time was withheld from between the hospital to Izuku standing on top of Gargoyle, what did we end up with? Well, Izuku had chats with his mom, Izuku had chats with Gran Torino, Izuku had chats with Hawks about Nagant, the one person that actually mattered. So when it comes down to here, the author there's no legitimate goodwill when it comes to taking this at face value, because this probably isn't something that should be taken at face value. So ultimately, this is a chapter that I would heavily recommend holding off till next week on the opinions about Izuku's behavior here, because this to me just smells like framing. And even if Izuku's reckless, like if Izuku really was reckless on this situation and was super gung-ho, like if we look at the planning sequence and we see Izuku just not registering anything and being super gung-ho and not listening to his seniors, then yeah, we'll completely rag on him next week. But if that didn't happen and this actually gets portrayed in a negative light, it's on every single person here for not trying to speak to the kid. Like when I see them saying be cautious, that just seems like a last minute thing of being like, Izuku, don't just walk through the yard. There might be traps everywhere. Other thing though, Izuku might actually be brave because danger sense isn't going off. Because for everyone else here, them saying be cautious as they're approaching the mansion makes sense if Izuku's walking too quickly. But for every other person here, and Hawks isn't there, they don't have extrasensory capabilities. So Izuku may have just walked through there, not cautiously, because he was fully aware that nothing was wrong. But yeah, we'll have to see next week. Again, I would love to really berate Izuku. You guys know. I would rag on it. You guys know. I'll rag on anyone. But in this case, yeah, I'm not buying what the author is selling in any which way. I am very excited though for the possibility that All For One's going to hardcore haze Izuku. I would love to see All For One like kidnap one of the Class 1A kids and turn them into a Nomu and make Izuku fight it. Cool. That would be hilarious. I mean, like, not actually hilarious, but hilarious in the sense of like, yeah, now this is actually a really compelling villain. Like, seriously, if All For One did that, everyone would hate. Oh man, if All For One took one of the fan favorites, who's fan favorite right now? Not Bakugo, not Shoto. Who has done no wrong? He's not gonna do Suyu. Yeah. If he took Suyu and turned her into Nomu, oh, I'm pretty sure a lot of people could. Or Mina, yeah, or Mina. Like, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people would be very upset. Would really hate All For One. But will it happen? I don't know. I don't know if All For One's that bad. But yeah, guys, let me know what you thought down below for the video. Let me know your thoughts. I would love to get any opinions that you have, especially for that first portion with All For One's conversations. Let me know down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.